William the Conqueror's legacy will forever be defined by the events of 1066, when the Battle of Hastings determined that Normans, not Anglo-Saxons, would rule England. But what brought the Duke of Normandy to such a point when he could achieve this remarkable conquest? Who was Duke William before he was a conquering king? And what caused the Duchy of Normandy to produce a whole brood of conquerors and adventurers who would capture lands across the Mediterranean world? Today on Real Crusades History, we'll look at the story of the rise of William the Conqueror, Duke of Normandy. William was born at Val-ès around 1028, the only son of Robert the Magnificent, the Duke of Normandy. William's mother was Herleva, and over the centuries much has been made of the fact that she was not married to Robert according to the laws of the church. But historian David Bates says that such arrangements were common among the Normans at this time, and William's status as Robert's heir wasn't unusual. Although they were great champions of the church, the Normans were still in many ways adapting to Christian norms. In 1035, when William was a small child, Duke Robert died while on pilgrimage to Jerusalem. In accordance with the late Robert's wishes, the Normans installed his son, William, as the new duke. Nevertheless, there was much anxiety among the Norman aristocracy at the accession of a child. The chronicler, William of Malmesbury, in recalling these events, quoted the famous passage from Ecclesiastes, "Woe to the land whose king is a child." William's relative, Count Gilbert of Brion, was named chief guardian of the 8-year-old duke. William's protectors tried to maintain stability, but by the 1040s many nobles were settling their rivalries through bloody private warfare, and the young duke's representatives had little power to stop them. The violence was spilling into the ducal court. Some factions saw the minority as a prime opportunity to either seize control of the child ruler or eliminate him, whichever might better serve their ends. Gilbert of Brion was killed within months of attaining his post. In the early 1040s, an assassin managed to enter the child duke's quarters and slay Osborne the Steward, one of William's primary guardians. Some accounts claim that Osborne was stabbed to death in William's own bedchamber as he lay sleeping. One can only imagine what sort of an impact such experiences would have had on a small boy. William learned quickly that he'd been born into a world of ruthlessness, and that survival required him to discover his own ruthlessness. Above all, he vowed that one day he would, like his father, impose order through strong rule. Crucial to young William's survival was the continued presence at court of his mother, Herleva, and her male relatives. An intelligent and determined woman, Herleva was fiercely protective of her son. Some accounts claim that her brother Walter slept beside his young nephew to ensure his safety, and occasionally had to flee with the boy in the dead of night to protect his life. Later, William would praise the actions of his mother's family during these difficult years. The chronicler William of Jumièges summarizes the turmoil of this period. During William's minority, many of the Normans, renouncing their fealty to him, raised earthworks in many places and constructed for themselves the strongest castles. When they felt themselves thus sufficiently secure, a number of them immediately rebelled and inflicted cruel destruction upon the country. However, even as a youth, William began to assert his rule. He showed himself capable of commanding armed expeditions and subdued unruly vassals. Despite the rebellion, historian David Douglas points out that young William benefited from many of the effective structures developed by the late Robert and other previous Norman dukes. Most nobles still supported William and his inner circle, and the church hierarchy was also firmly in the young duke's camp. While the violence that plagued William's minority is striking, historian David Bates cautions us from viewing the period as pure chaos. The upper Norman nobility struggled with one another for control of the duchy's future, but their feuding was governed by a strict honor code, which limited the brutality. Bates calls this culturally structured violence. As an example, Bates points to the slaying of Osborne the Steward, which was committed by the son of a nobleman called Roger of Montgomery. William's guardians expelled Roger of Montgomery from lands that had been granted to him by the late Duke Robert. Roger's son killed Osborne in retaliation for this affront. One of Osborne's followers avenged his master's death by killing the murderer. This brought an end to the feud, and in the future both factions collaborated. Roger of Montgomery's son, Roger II, cooperated closely with Osborne's son, William Fitz-Osborne, during William the Conqueror's reign. From early in his reign, William showed much interest in the church and cultivated contacts in the wider reform movement. He strengthened his father's monastic foundations and met with churchmen who had provided spiritual guidance to his father. David Bates says that despite the turmoil of rebellious nobles, the 1040s proved to be a time of some religious prosperity in Normandy. The consecration of the Abbey Church of Lebec, founded by the hermit Erlewin, took place at this time. Lebec would prove to be one of the most outstanding centers of Norman spirituality and creativity. William took decisive steps to enforce public order, patronize monasteries, restore property claimed to have been lost during the Viking era, and to address petitions. The great challenge of William's early reign came from Guy of Burgundy, William's cousin and his boyhood companion. Guy hatched a plot to oust William and seize the duchy for himself. With ties to the ducal family, Guy became a magnet for nobles unhappy with William's rule. Guy was joined by Nigel, Lord of the Cotentin, and the rebellion gathered strength as its forces moved eastward into the heart of the duchy. William appealed for help to his overlord, King Henry I of France. Henry responded positively. He joined Duke William's army near Caen in the very heart of rebel territory. In the initial skirmishing, one of Guy's allies, Ralph of Tessin, deserted and joined William. The following day, the two sides met for battle on a stretch of land near Val-es-dunes, close to modern-day Contville. The battle began with a series of small cavalry clashes. Some sources report that King Henry himself was in the thick of the fighting. He was unhorsed, but his knights slew his attackers and rescued the king. Initially, the rebels seemed to have the advantage, but William led a series of cavalry charges that devastated the ranks of his enemies. The sources make note of William's ferocity in the fighting, and the Norman knights played a key role in gaining the advantage for the royal army. The rebel coalition broke apart and fled in disorder. The king and the duke pursued them, slaughtering the fugitives in such numbers that no prisoners were taken. The post-battle massacre was not in keeping with the conventions of the day. Generally, victorious armies would capture defeated enemies to be ransomed later by their relatives. But William seemed to embody the fury of his Viking ancestors on the day of this battle. However, after the storm of battle had died down, William proved to be more merciful. He pardoned many of the former rebels on condition that they swear allegiance to him and take down unauthorized castles. William understood that he needed the cooperation of the broader Norman aristocracy to ensure the success of his reign. William's victory at the Battle of Val-es-dunes set the stage for the Duchy of Normandy to reach the apogee of its power and influence. R. Allen Brown says that Duke William was able to establish an ascendancy over the military and militant lay aristocracy within his duchy, which by 1066 was no less complete than his control over the Norman church and its prelates. Personal leadership and personal example, mutual interests, and a common outlook were powerful elements in this ascendancy. Yet also no aspect of ducal power as wielded by Duke William is more impressive than his capacity to make or break the magnates who shared at his will the lordship of the duchy with him.